lecture by Professor KIKHI is, is also very inviting for us to really reflect and think about contemporary discourse of development. And I think he has raised a lot of fundamental issues and concerns. So I'm not going to, repeat his ideas and arguments. And I think because they are, clear in itself. And I also would like to request Professor KIKHI to pardon me if in any way I mischaracterize some of his ideas and arguments. But then it's not a kind of response that I'm going to do, but since he gave us as a listener to his lecture, he gave us the liberty to raise more questions. So I have some questions in mind, based on what the kind of issues that he was tackling with. Some of the things I think which I really find striking and critical to think about is the very idea of the model of development and situating it within the larger discourse of development. I think that is something which is very, very inviting and powerful for me. For example, when Professor KIKHI talks about this idea of a very, very centralized top-down approach of development, or in other words, what he says that how does New Delhi perceive the Northeast? I think that is a very, very, inviting or very, very powerful starting point, to really think about like how does New Delhi, really perceive, Northeastern India. And he captures, the shift in terms of the shift in terms of the perception from one that, was an economic periphery, in a sense that, the region being largely outside of the larger development agenda. And from the 1970s and the 80s onwards, we began to see an attempt to integrate the Northeast, within the larger development agenda through the establishment of Northeastern Council in 1971, setting up a ministry, a separate ministry. Northeast India is the only region, which have a separate development ministry, right? I think these are very, very important and which cannot be ignored, when we are talking about development issues in Northeast India. And through that, I think he also really bring out this issue of center periphery or core periphery, which is also a very, very useful lens to understand development discourse in Northeast India. Now, some of the questions he raised, and particularly in the context of tribes, which I think worth pondering, and I myself also don't really know the answer is. It's simple, but it to me, it's also very fundamental in a sense that at the end of the day, where are the people? What is happening to the people, right? So I think that to me is very, 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 very fundamental. And I also think that, his starting point about landlessness of tribal communities, I think that is something, so much pervasive, in Northeast India today, in a sense that, many a times we think that, tribes as an identity or as a community are closely tied to land. But what we see in the Northeast today is, a new kind of phenomenon where, there are a lot of tribal communities who are gradually losing their land, or in other words, the rise of, landlessness among tribal societies. There are a lot of other issues that he discussed and talk about. I'm not going to repeat them, but for the sake of having this intellectual dialogue, I wish to present some key ideas and questions that I have in my mind. Now, the first is that taking forward from his argument about what is the Northeast, how do Northeast Delhi perceive Northeast India? My thinking, I am forced to take forward this idea by trying to see as someone who is based in the Northeast, or as someone myself who is from the Northeast, how do I perceive the Northeast, right? So when I'm in the region or when I'm outside the region, or if I'm from the region, what is my perception about the Northeast? Definitely, I think the statist perception is very clear. It is an economic periphery. It is a distant periphery. It is remote, right? The people are different. The colonial state have said that, it is a Mongoloid fringe. But what about, our own perception about this region, the reason that we are talking about? And secondly, in connected to that, since we are talking about, model of development, and towards the end, Professor KIKHI clearly indicated, some kind of not giving a kind of, prescription as to what will be the nature of the development, model that region like Northeast India should pursue. But taking from that, I think a pointer probably that comes to my mind is, can we have a singular model of development for the Northeast? That is one. In a sense that, can we have one singular model for the Northeast? Now, in India, for example, today we talk about the Delhi model. We are talking about the Dravidian model. We are talking about the much celebrated Kerala model of development. We are talking about the Gujarat model of development. So India, and that is one part of the story. So are we talking about one model of development for the Northeast? That is one. So when we have these different kinds of models, I also think that, probably reflecting on the issue of variations within the region, in a sense that, why some communities in the Northeast, maybe within Nagaland or within Mizoram or Manipur, have done quite well socially, economically, and politically. Now, how do we account for these variations, within the region, probably between states, across or across communities, right? How do we make sense of that variations within the larger, discourse of development that we are talking about? And now, something that, as a student of sociology, and definitely, who is interested on subject related to development, I think one of the point, that Professor KIKHI have raised, I think, which is very important for all of us to really think about, I think, is the question of wealth concentration in the region today, in a sense that, the tribal elites, right? So some 20, maybe 10 years ago, we have people like Duncan and Carlson, who work on the issue of development. And I think it was Duncan who says that, Northeast is resource rich, but the people are poor. Now, and today, Professor KIKHI clearly demonstrate that funds are coming from the central government to different ministries. Now, the question to ask in the last few decades, we have seen that, there is this emergence of a new kind of, elites within tribal society. So the question about this concentration of wealth, I think the question about this concentration of wealth and a new form of stratification that is seeping in tribal society, I think this is something that needs to be, taken up, more, strongly, or, taken up forward. Now, so when a society which is, when a society which are seen as more egalitarian in terms of their social organization, which are kinship-based, which are more communitarian-based, when these kind of stratifications, begin to seep into the society, what happened to the society? So what is happening to the society? And Professor KIKHI is too kind, to not to mention any other tribal society, but I've seen that in Mizo society also, right? Today, one of the most serious issues facing Mizo society today is the inequality between the rich and the poor. And there is a huge concentration of wealth in Mizo society, and particularly, in urban areas, right? Particularly, for example, in Aizawl. So therefore, there is this very, very stark divide that we see, in every tribal society today. So Professor KIKHI talks about, the case of Nagaland, where there are regimes of corruption, where there are concentration of wealth. And this is something that is, becoming more of, a phenomenon, in the entire region. So I think this is something that probably all of us, can think and ponder about. The money is coming, but where are the money going? And what is, what is happening to the people to this? It also, I think, raise a more difficult questions in terms of, the constitutional protections. For example, much of, these tribal areas, are granted some kind of constitutional protection, either through, the special constitutional provisions like in the state of Nagaland or the 6th schedule or many other at the level of state, for example, in the state of Manipur. Now, how do these constitutional protections interact with the larger development discourse? And whose interests are they actually serving today? In a sense that, who are getting the benefit, out of these constitutional protections in the name of, protecting tribal customs or tribal customary in relation to land, in relation to resources, so on and so forth. Now, my final question, probably, or none of them are a question, so just some pointers, for us to think about. My last reflection probably is, in a context where we are seeing a lot of acceleration of infrastructure projects, infusion of capital, whether domestic and international, probably what is, how do people respond to this? In a sense that, today lands are increasingly commodified across the region. The number of dams that are constructed across the region are on the rise. Plantations in the form of palm oil, mining, so on and so forth are coming in a big way. Now, in this kind of context, probably it may also be, useful to really reflect in a context of what is currently happening in Northeast India today, where there is an aspiration and a desire, to catch up, right? To use the modernization language, there is a desire to catch up, and participate in the larger development story. But at the same time, what is actually happening, on ground? Is it, a new kind of disposition that is happening? Is it a new kind of, land grab that is happening, or a new kind of, social movements, that are emerging in the region in response to, this intuition of domestic capital or infrastructure projects across the region? So I'm going to stop here. Professor KIKHI, it was wonderful listening to you. Probably, I think these are, like I said, not questions, but just some reflection, on my part, as as a role, as a discussion, So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Puia. I think you have extended the questions to more questions to reflect upon. Maybe Professor KIKHI, would you like to respond, or then I will open it for audience.
Yeah, I need not respond, I think, because it looks like our discussion, we are in agreement. And yes, in fact, he has raised, he has reiterated many of the issues I was trying to raise. And yes, so I need not respond, I think, but if there are questions, I will take, I think. Yes.
So the floor is open now for any comments and questions or reflections on both the speakers. I request the audience, either they can raise their hands or they can even keep a text in the chat box.
Hello, sir. Can I go first?
Yes, Olivia, please go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for enlightening us with the existing conditions of the Northeast in terms of development. Now, as far as my understanding goes, Professor KIKHI has highlighted what I would assume as a nexus between the state and also what I would like to categorize as the tribal elites. One question that sort of consistently glares at me is in terms of now we have also heard the respected second speaker talk about the people's in terms of people's responses, but for me, my question, which can be an open question to all of you, is in terms of the social location. So basically what I'm asking is, what is the social location or role of the people, that is the general masses, even including this community of intellectuals, let's say, particularly in terms of their accountability or what type of agencies do they have, especially given the fact that for example, in the state of Nagaland, as we know it, it represents a diversity of tribal and sub-tribal identities, which more often than not sort of reflects an inclination towards tribalism. So then within these existing conditions, tribal, social, economic, political conditions, how do we approach the question of development? So basically, with these existing conditions, so basically the challenges that the society in general faces because of all these reasons. I mean, for example, when people are, we talk about accountability of the government, but what about the accountability of the people? When people are willing to sell their votes, let's say for a bottle of alcohol, or even for a job, let's say, so how do we, like, is it the question is it like each man for his own, or are we talking about the more inclusive aspect of development for for the people in general, for the masses? I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but this is something which I sort of almost like constantly think about.
Chairperson, shall I come in, or I'll take the questions together? Or I'll just...
as you wish. Yeah, you can take it now. Yeah.
Yes, I'll quickly respond. I think when it comes to the role of the people, like say you are given example of Nagaland, for example. Now we have created a kind of a systemic. I was mentioning earlier also systemic corruption, and now what is happening? Society is becoming like a very parasitic kind of society. And why I'm saying parasitic society, you take the case of, for example, you take the case of Nagaland. Sometimes I wonder whether our politicians, for that matter, have any vision for the state. Our politicians, or those who are part of the governance, those who are governing, bureaucrats, for that matter, do they have any vision? Why not they think of generating net revenue, for that matter? Let us take the case of, if you take, for example, Nagaland as a case of a farming state, agricultural state, where a huge population of a huge percentage of our population are depending on agriculture. Now, if we ask Naga farmers today, for example, whether they are producing any surplus, producing any profit, no. Many of the farmers in the villages who are coming in the villages, whose designation itself is a farmer or belong to agriculture community, they are, forget about the surplus. They are not even able to cultivate sufficient for their own family. What has become? So over the years, we are no more self-reliant. Once upon a time, we claim our forefathers are very hardworking, self-reliant. We are no more self-reliant. We have become so much dependent on the politicians. For example, you were making a mention of election process, votes in Nagaland. Let me give you one example. Sometimes I really wonder, for example, you take southern Angami area, the southernmost part of Nagaland, which borders Manipur. Very good, very famous, well known for potato cultivation. Now what happens? Potato you cannot keep in bulks. Now government has no policy. We do not have preservation houses. Forget about making potato chips, Uncle Chips. Forget about that. So what is happening? These farmers do not have the capacity to store their potatoes. So they sell their potatoes at per month, 40 kilo. That's Assamese term, I think. So they sell the potatoes at the time of selling 25 rupees per kilo, for example. These potatoes go to Assam Valley, go to Manipur Valley, Imphal Valley, comes back, and I'm buying the potato which I have sold for 25 rupees now at rupees 40, for example. Somewhere I think, somewhere I think we need to address somewhere. So this issue has to do with policymakers. This issue has to do with those who are in power, those who are in bureaucratic structure, and also the people. I think we need to be, otherwise when we are too reliant, when we are too dependent on our politicians, perhaps The most powerful politicians in the whole world are perhaps Naga politicians. And who have made them the most powerful politicians in the world? I think we public has. So policy level also, we lack policy. There is no policy, and that's one thing. Another thing is also people have, a system has corrupted the people, and as long as people are corrupted, as long as the system is corrupt, our politicians will continue to enjoy this corrupted position. So it's a partial take on what you were trying to say. It's a partial take, and there could be so many other reasons. Yes. Over to you, Chair.
Yeah. I think there is one text message, I think. Okay, maybe a compliment, I think. Yeah. Can we have some more?
I have a question for Professor KIKHI. Thank you, Professor KIKHI, for a very interesting, wonderful discussion and highlighting some of the key features and pattern of the development model in Northeast. My question is, somewhere in your presentation, you mentioned about that there is this expansion of neoliberalism in Northeast context. And at the same time, you mentioned that the state is the sole agent, state remains as the sole agent of development in Northeast through central fund, through the formal institution and setup of institutions. And so this brings a very interesting picture for us to make sense of how does this neoliberal model operate? What are the mechanisms? What are the features? How is it installed here? If you can just explain a little bit of this.
I think this is an important question. Somewhere I mentioned neoliberalism. Now, and I was trying to say something like how the problem of I started with that, have we entered into a Weberian situation of crisis and conflict? And if there's crisis, if there's conflict, and I was saying how neoliberalism has intensified that crisis, intensified the conflict. And when I'm talking about neoliberalism, I'm talking about how neoliberalism. I know this is a heavy question, this is a big question. There are takes both for on against neoliberalism, but how neoliberalism, we know, is a transition from laissez-faire, for example, and laissez-faire is without the intervention of the state. Now, what is happening in the context of the tribals, to my understanding, to my reading, and I know there will be arguments on this, but what has happened is the state, it looks like the state has failed, and now, and I say towards the end, perhaps we are entering from Weberian situation of crisis and conflict. Perhaps we are entering into an Althusserian situation of Althusserian situation. And when I say Althusserian, we know that Lou Althusser, how he was critically looking at the state. And he was saying state is nothing but state has failed. State has become simply an oppressive apparatus in the hands of the rulers. Now, in the context of the tribals, Puia was also, reiterating how we are confronting with the emergence of a new elite, a new political elite, economic elite, new local elites. Say, for example, so what is happening now? Now, under neoliberalism, state becomes important, and so corporates, for example, that's why state has nothing but state has become. Public is supposed to look at the state. State is supposed to solve, but state is not. Instead of giving solutions, state has become an agent in the hands of the politicians, in the hands of the bureaucrats, in the hands of the corporates. So Rio, for example, Rio will use the state. Rio will use all the agents of the state, for example, to protect his wealth. For example, taking the case of, so that we see that kind of a situation. State. So we see a kind of a nexus, and how state has become. If we agree with a status where if we agree that we have entered into a Althusserian situation, then state is nothing but state is used now by the corporates, the new corporates, and the capitalists, for the matter, the capitalists. to protect their wealth. That was my take, because the state is used by the elites nothing but as an oppressive apparatus to exploit the common masses. So that's where I would partially address your statement, question, Dr. Suraj. Yes, it will not be totally okay, I know.
Thank you, Professor KIKHI. Just before
Suraj, I was wondering whether I could ask a question.
Sure.
Professor KIKHI, thank you. I was completely out of depth because these are some details which I'm hearing for the first time. My own research is on tribals in South India. So I was intrigued by your initial hook that you're going to contextualize it against both Northeast as well as with the people. So I would like to stay with that first part of the Northeast. So some of the things that we have discussed and you have raised is something that I also see in a scheduled area in southern India. So what is that specific Northeast angle that you would foreground as a problem there as far as the developmental issues are concerned? Because one is a region, other is a people. So as a region per se, what is that specific thing that is triggering all these issues of lack of development and people's grievances against the state-led development? Also, I was wondering at a factual level, this 90-10 ratio, was it there since the beginning, or was it initiated at a particular point of time by Government of India as far as financing of the development projects in the Northeast region is concerned? Thank you.
How do we perceive Northeast? Now, this is where perhaps I may not be in total agreement with what Roluah was suggesting. He was floating an idea. Can we have a singular model for Northeast? That may be debated. I know when he floated, because how do we look at Northeast now? I see two schools of thought. How we perceive Northeast by the academicians. The first school of thought perceives Northeast as a homogeneous single conceptual category, and lesser native scholars are for that. And perhaps that is where Delhi is. Delhi is perhaps failing to see anything beyond Guwahati. I will put it that way. Then the other school of thought is they are looking at all these varied differences, and Northeast is very complex. This is where perhaps when we talk about, for example, even political representation, somewhere I think I would agree with Pierre and Becker, where he was talking about we need to have representative democracy, very diverse. Take the state of Nagaland again. Why so many issues? Why so much issue with ENPO, Eastern Nagas for that matter? And we are entered into a tripartite kind of MOU between the state of Nagaland, the ENPO, and the central group. So these are issues. Maybe perhaps that's why how we look at Northeast. So in terms of, yes, we share some common characteristics. Northeast share some common characteristics, especially when we're looking in terms of geopolitical history, for example. We share some common characteristics, but then especially development per se, we may not have a singular model for Northeast. Say I was taking example of, for example, why not the policy planners do not notice alder tree, for example. Why they do not notice steel? So, but then alder tree may not be feasible for other states of the. So Meghalaya, the government is trying, but then it doesn't grow as good as it is grown in some part of this thing. Now, that's my take. And the one part was we were talking about this ratio, isn't it? That 90. See, this, I think, this become part of this one, largely become part of this NLCPR 90, and now when we look at NLCPR, then NLCPR, I think it was introduced in the year 1998. So I see this, that now it is no more. So if you look at the latest scheme, for example, PM Divine, for the matter, is no more talking about 90:10. It's fine. Now my question is, when so much money is pumped into the region without accountability, now what is happening? We see emergence of new middle classes, and one clear class is very visibly elite class across the tribal these things, elite class now. So now many of these projects, let us talk example, for example, autonomous district council for that matter. It looks like many of these projects are hijacked by a very few locals, tribals, where they are not representative of the what we call in Hindi Aam Aadmi. Yes. I used to joke in the class, Mango Manu, right? So actually, literally, that is wrong. But then the next, so that is my take. So partially addressing your questions, I think I've not missed.
Professor KK, did the PM Divine replace other platforms for development, or are all these platforms existing simultaneously?
Not exactly. We are aware that PM Divine was introduced in the Union Budget 2022-2023, but then no, NEC exists. Ministry of Donor exists for that matter. All these other ministries also exist. My question is on why it has to be 90:10. My question is, it looks like Delhi is spoiling us. So, for example, you take the case of Nagas. Indo-Naga struggle has, to me, a very critical take. I know people do not like Nagas, do not like when I say this. To me, Indo-Naga conflict is nothing but a bait. It's like a bait which Nagas have been negotiating with Delhi. Now, this is a very critical statement. I know many people don't like this, but then is it a bait? It looks like it has become a bait. So what do we do? Peace bonus packages, special economy packages. But then, in the long run, are these concepts, are these perspectives sustainable? I don't think no. I think a time is coming very soon where Delhi is going to tell us, perhaps, you take care of yourself. Are we ready to take care of myself? It's very critical thing. I know many people will not like this, but that's my position right now.
Okay, I have a question for Dr. Puia. Dr. Puia, are you there?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very detailed comments, and particularly when you talked about the regional inequality. Even Dr. Lonko is there from Central Institute of Haryana. Maybe she would also have some questions on that. My question is, when we compare this Central India and Northeast India in terms of the development models, focusing on tribal regions and the kind of development that's taking place, what is the role of borders here? Does it make the development model peculiar, or how does border come into this picture? If you can just.
Thank you, Suraj, for that. I think before I come to the question of border, I just wanted to, because since I think it's another opportunity also to talk about from my own perspective and views about the tribal condition in contemporary India, which is that the specific histories of colonialism on, say today, what we call the mainland India and Northeast India is important. And secondly, the different kind of legislations for which, someone like Professor Kaka is a very strong advocate of sixth schedule in, Central India today, essentially because the sixth schedule grants some kind of recognition of land rights, and other resource rights to the tribals, for which tribes in Northeast India, according to his argument, is that did not experience, this position in the way in which many tribes in Central India experience. But I think that specific histories of colonialism, post-colonial, state formation is important to, really understand this. But I think when it comes to borders and development, So one part, I think, in the context of the larger development, I think it provided communities in the region to engage in a trans-border kind of connections where you have a lot of, for example, in terms of migration. So you have a lot of outward migration, not only to India's metropolitan, but also you have a lot of trans migration to Southeast Asian countries, and particularly in today's time, we have a lot of migrants. I don't know about a lot of states, but we have quite a significant number of migrants who began to go in places like East Asia, or maybe South Korea, maybe Japan. So I think this is a new phenomenon development. So that borderland location, provides that kind of window of opportunity for people to migrate, right, and opening up new avenues of employment opportunities. But at the same time, Professor KIKHI also talks about it, how the Indian state perceived the region as a securitized region, which did not in many ways allow the region to maximize its borderland location. And definitely some efforts in the form of maximizing the borderland location of the region came with the Lookis policy and then, the EKIs. But still, the suspicion about, the region as inhabited by, different kinds of people, I think that remains there. Despite, there are rhetorics about, for example, during the UPA era, the environment minister Jairam Ramesh, was saying that Northeast is to be politically integrated with mainland India, but the future of the Northeast in terms of its economic integration is with the Southeast Asian countries. But I think those discourses remain at the level of rhetorics, and it really did not translate at the local level. So, but at the local level, at the more people-to-people level, I think there are a lot of exchanges that are happening, probably in terms of labor, probably in terms of trade. A lot of goods, are coming down, and this trading, and other economic activities, are happening at a very, very informal level. So, for which you have a lot of this informal. I mean, for the state, it can be illegal, but for the people, these informal trading relationships, have developed, for a long period of time, and this also, in some way, are a reflection of the way in which communities adapt, to the new kind of realities, that they are confronted with. So I think at a very, very broader level, in terms of what the state is trying to do with the people, through policies like the EKIs or the Lookis policy, I think that is very evident. And secondly, how the people themselves are leveraging their borderland location by moving to countries like Singapore, East Asia, Malaysia, finding jobs and opportunities there. That is also something something that is happening. And the third point that I was talking about, I think, is informal networks of trade that has developed in the region, and I don't know in the last many years, right? Different kind of commodities that are being traded from the time of the Britishers and even to this day. So I think from a border, I mean, the region as a border and the borderland location of the region, I think this is something which is also very important to talk about. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Puia.
Would like to get some questions from our students, participants.
Phoebe is there, Repa is there.
Don't force us to take your names, okay? Please speak out.
Phoebe should begin.
Yeah, sir, may I?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, Repa, go ahead.
Hi, Professor KIKHI, sir. I mean, I have read a lot about your works, and this is the first time that I get to hear you speaking. So it's such a privilege to hear from you. I think when we are taking our stance as a nation, we are also forgetting about the state as a independent body, which we were at one point of time. And I believe, like, when we reflect on development, I equate with what Puia has written about this carrot and stick theory, where the Indian nation would use militarization as a form to suppress those voices. On the other hand, carrot in a sense that like the development project that comes in to again suppress the voices. So I do understand development in that sense in the context of Northeast and how like the voices of the region or aspiration has been like suppressed. I want to ask like one question to Professor KIKHI about the bottoms-up approach. India is quite apparent when we talk about federal state, but when we look at the model of Switzerland, where the cantons and communes are like where they have this very proper bottoms-up approach. So how do we like promote this bottoms-up approach even in terms of Northeast context when it comes to development, rather than always looking at the top-down approach that we have at the moment?
Yeah, I think, no, I got, yeah, thank you. I think, so, Gunther Frank was, when he was looking at his very work of development of underdevelopment or underdevelopment of development for that matter, when he was writing in the context of Latin America for that matter. So this very concept of dependency approach, where is referring to how the system, how the world system is turning this one into one who is relatively rich core, and the other one is the poor periphery. That is what exactly was your question? I missed out. Sorry.
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, I was just asking about like how do we promote a bottoms-up approach, which was already there in Nagaland when we look at
yes. No, one phone call came, and then that's so I think that is where I was also trying to say towards the end, whether I do not know whether ethno development for that matter is the answer to this bottom-up approach. In fact, if you look at Niti Aayog, Niti Aayog was, which has Niti Aayog, we know that Niti Aayog has replaced the Planning Commission, and every state has a Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog actually was talking about bottom-up economic planning. My question is it good enough? So ethno development, that's why are we talking about sustainable development approach, where bottom-up, where we are talking about empowerment of indigenous minority, where we are talking about local communities for their own road based on their cultural values, identity, and ancestral indigenous resources. My conclusion was also somewhere there. Can we have a paradigm shift? That's what I was arguing in the end. I was asking whether the people of the region, the tribals, be given the opportunity and choice to present their views and to select the type of development they need. Will they play a decisive role in the effective implementation of developmental programs? So this is what we call it in other words, we call it participatory development, for example. So bottom-up kind of approach. I think that is one alternative to counter or to replace the kind of development which we are having. So I think that's you were referring to Switzerland, Swiss model. Nagaland government has in place, for that matter, some Swiss model, and they are looking at, for example, when they are looking at disaster management, for example, we have been using some of these models. But we also need to be very critical when we select our developmental schemes, when we select our developmental planning. It has to be, we have to take into consideration the local context. Do we understand the local context? So we need to understand, for example, the way of life of the people. We need to understand the culture. So Gujarat model is a success. Kerala model is a success. But then can we take that model in the context of in the context of Northeast? See, let us take the example of very famously Northeast tribals. They have been practicing this shifting cultivation, for example. But if the government of the day comes up and says, do away with your shifting cultivation, now what is the alternative? And what is the alternative, for example, Nagaland government is giving? The farmers asked to start planting rubber trees, tea plantation, for example, small tea growers. Now the question is to harvest rubber plantation we need 10 years to harvest that rubber plantation. Now, my question is then the government should feed these farmers who have shifted from shifting cultivation to rubber plantation. Then the next 10 years, government should feed them. Otherwise, what do they eat, for example? So sometimes I think planning has to be meticulously taking into consideration all these cultural context, topography context, geographical context. We have so many schemes. I think Delhi is trying to introduce so many schemes taking into consideration some of these points: topography, geography, climate, soil fertility. It has been trying to introduce some of the related agro-based industries, forest-based industries, etc., etc. But then we need to educate the people also. And then, so somewhere, I think what we are doing is definitely not good enough. That will be my take. Thank you. I hope I've partially addressed your question.
Yeah, I think Professor KIKHI, there is a question in the chat box. Maybe it is supplementary to the question that has been asked just now. Should I read out, or this is?
I can see.
Yeah, please. Chingsa Sanma.
Are there successful examples of participatory or community from the region? Ethno development is a different thing. Neoliberalism is a different thing. If we have a very strong state in place under neoliberalism, because under neoliberalism, it is talking about under neoliberalism. Neoliberalism involves the priority of the price mechanism. That's what I was saying, the free enterprise and the system of competition and a strong impartial state. The question is, we do not have a strong and impartial state. So since we do not have a strong and impartial state, state is supposed to be the solution. State is supposed to advance all these development schemes. But when you have an impartial state, that's exactly where the problem is arising. And that's why I was saying, tribal situation in Northeast looks like we are entering into an Althusserian kind of situation where state is failing, not totally failed. State is failing, state is becoming partial. State has been allowing itself to be used by the elites, by the corporates, to suppress the common public. That is what is happening as far as my understanding is concerned. Now, ethno development is, when we talk about ethno development, it is a concept. It is supposed to be a sustainable development approach, where we are talking about empowerment, empowering indigenous minority. I was talking about the minority. Women, for example, constitute a minority. When we plan, do we have, for that matter, gender equity kind of budget, gender equity kind of developmental planning? So perhaps we need to give meticulous. We need to look at that. So ethno development is something which is talking about promoting cultural values, identity, and ancestral resources. Where does the state come in? We need a strong state this way. Under neoliberalism, if neoliberalism is talking about strong state, impartial state. So, but when we have states which are partial, states which has become very unneutral, that's the problem, I think. I see the problem there, one of the problem there at least. Thank you. Dr. Suraj.
Yeah.
One of my colleague, Dr. Rashi wants to ask a question. Yes.
Yes, please.
Sure.
It'll be last one, yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I'll be very brief here. Since Professor KIKHI, you ended with the idea of ethno development, right? So I was just kind of wondering two of the most significant challenges to that. Number one is decades of the dominant development discourse, something that Dr. Puia has also kind of picked up as the last point of his discussion, which is, what about the aspirations, the desires of the people who have seen the dominant discourse of development that has been entering into the region, and they want to be, let's say, the main characters of these development stories. So when we talk about participatory development or people-centric development, then the assumption for me here is that, there is a people-centric development here would mean indigenous development or indigenous models of development or sustainable development. Is that something that you're kind of assuming, or is that something that we can challenge as part of the development discourse? That's the one question. The second one, of course, because there was a lot of emphasis on the emerging tribal elites. So again, the question of the indigenous models or ancestral models or models based on, giving due respect to the respect that they deserve to their identities and everything. Again, will that be hijacked by the tribal elites when we think about something like a participatory development and ethno-development model? So how do we look at these forces as a challenge to the idea that you sort of ended your talk with? Thank you.
Dr. Suraj, I will just address partially. I think Dr. Rashi has raised an important issue when we are trying to promote indigenous practices. When trying to promote indigenous models. Now, it is also crucial, as she has said, we also have to look at the market. Do we have market, for example? Many of our indigenous crafts, for example, many of our indigenous products do not have markets. So it's also about competition. It's also about marketing. So I think when we talk indigenous practices, when we are saying promoting, we also have to look at one important aspect is we also have to look at the market. I think market is also important. I think now, will the elites hijack? We need to have a mechanism in place. Otherwise, it will happen. It is bound to happen. I will give one example just to partially addressing this issue. In Nagaland, once upon a time, there was a protest by the villagers because the bus owners, they have raised the bus, this one, what is fare, bus fare. So as a protest, as a kind of a protest, these villagers decided that nobody will go by bus. This is commuting from the neighboring villages to the capital of the city, Kohima. So these villagers, as a sign of protest, everybody started, avoiding, boycotting the buses. So how do they go now? They started going to the cities by sumos, Tata sumos. Now the peculiar fact is, again, it is the bus owners now immediately they started procuring Tata sumos. So ownership has not changed, the mode has changed, and the villagers ended up paying more to commute to the city. So that's a peculiar kind of situation. So that issue is there. I think, yes, I just partial address to the question.
Thank you, Rashi.
Okay, I think we had quite a serious deliberations, and I think there are still many more to be further, maybe in our personal communications or later upon. So I think we come to the closing of this program. I think on behalf of Department of Sociology and Indian Sociological Society RC01, I thank Professor KIKHI as well as Professor Puia for your presence and participating and reflecting the critical aspects of development with regards to Northeast India. And I also thank the convener of RC01, Dr. Suraj, and co-convener, Dr. Rakesh, for congratulate for this organizing this event. And I also thank them for giving me the opportunity to chair this very vital theme session. So I think this is all for today. Yeah, thank you one and all.
Thank you, Professor KIKHI. Thank you, Dr. Puia. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.